see a working class candidate run, to see a candidate of color, to see a woman, to see a queer or trans candidate run, it really inspires turnout because it makes you believe that you can do it too. And the idea that we're supposed to somehow rally all people and all creeds behind the dudes that literally look like they founded this country is not going to work. We need to have a diversity in our governance in order to inspire the entire electorate to turn out.
Thanks for that. Wide Lens is a program that's relatively new here at the Coolidge. The purpose of the program is to expand our field of vision as we explore underrepresented perspectives through film and conversation. We're inviting you to get involved in that conversation following these screenings. This has been a fantastic program so far. We've had wonderful screenings of films like Moonlight, Fruitvale Station, She's Beautiful When She's Angry. And the thing that's happening at these post-film discussions is the thing that you normally dread at a Q&A, which is someone just saying like, I've got something I want to say. But this is welcome here, and it's been really eye-opening to hear from people and to hear the experiences of people that are coming out to these shows, so we look forward to a great discussion tonight. I want to thank the Brookline Community Foundation, who supports this film series with a grant. Thanks to them. I'd also like to thank the co-creator of this program, Dr. Raul Fernandez, who a lot of you know. Raul is also our moderator tonight, and I'd like to bring him up now to introduce tonight's guest.
Hey y'all, how you doing? Good. I am so excited today. I have been running around town with our featured guests all day long, and from the rally at City Hall Plaza to another rally at City Hall Plaza about TPS and some other events. We just came from a really great event just up the block. But this is what it's all been leading to. This is the moment that I've been most excited about, is having invited my good friend, Sandy Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to be our guest tonight. I will not hold us up because we have this film to watch, and then we're going to have our conversation, and I know that it's already past the screening time, and these folks are serious about their screening times here, so we're going to get right into it. But I just want to say thank you all for being here, for supporting Alexandria, and for supporting this Wide Lens film series that's now, I think this is our sixth film, and going strong. So thank you to those of you that continue to come out for these conversations. Right after this, there'll be the two of us on stage. We'll talk a little bit, but I really want you all to engage as well. I know Alexandria does too. So very quickly, before we actually begin the film, I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you to our guests for being here and for being a champion of the things that many of us in this room believe with all our hearts. So thank you very much, Alexandria. Let's do it. Okay. The feel-good movie of the year. Let's talk about it, shall we? I'd like to invite up our guest for tonight, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Where to begin after having watched that? First of all, once again, thank you for being here with us, being part of this Wide Lens film series, and thanks to the folks at the Coolidge for continuing to host important films and conversations like the one that we're going to have tonight. So let me start here. Michael Moore paints, shall we say, a grim picture of the state of affairs in America today, particularly in American politics, and he comes at both parties in this film. He also, though, shine some light on bright spots, the West Virginia teachers, for instance, the activists that are in Flint despite everything that's going on and the activism, the grassroots activism there, and elsewhere around the country, of course, also your campaign as well. Can you talk a little bit as you see this film and you see the grim nature of the reality, at least as Michael Moore paints it? How do you see the world out there? You've been around not just in New York's 14th, but you've also been around the country. How do you see it out there?
I think that what he is talking about in this film is really the forces that sometimes seem insurmountable in the trends of American culture and American society. And when you look at just the slow progress of things, the stagnant wages or declining wages, things like perpetuating injustice, you have to make a decision as to whether you think it is beyond repair or not. And I think each and every single one of us has to make that decision. And I think it's interesting. I still think, despite how grim it may seem in the film, I still think that Michael Moore doesn't know which decision to make. And when you see those kind of bright spots that he was talking about, Rashida Tlaib, Richard Ojeda, myself, he filmed each and every single one of us before our primary elections. He came and filmed me when I was in the middle of nowhere. I don't know, it must have been March or April, and he didn't know that I was gonna win. It was when, in fact, things seemed the darkest of the dark. Not a single progressive insurgent had won their election yet this year. We were losing and hemorrhaging seats. And something told him to film those three candidates. And all three of us won our primary elections this year. All three. And they pointed to the same exact forces in my race. They said the money in politics is too insurmountable. There was a $4 million challenge mounted against me. We only had $300,000 in the bank, y'all. Only $300,000. We were outspent 10-1. We were facing a third generation political machine. There was every reason to believe that this was going to be yet another defeat. But I think that this year is unusual in the openness that, in fact, this administration is forcing people to dive into, to take chances that they wouldn't ordinarily take, to make votes that they wouldn't ordinarily make in a primary election, or to even vote when they wouldn't normally vote. So I think that, in business as usual, it would be very grim, but I think that the bright spots are in fact indicative of some semblance of change. And so long as that seed is there, I believe that it is our responsibility to nurture it.
Let me ask you this. I mean, Mike Moore also talks about the 100 million non-voters in the last presidential election that would be, if they were a party, the largest party out there by leaps and bounds. You were able to change the electorate where you are. Talk to us a little bit about what that looked like on the ground. You've got some of your campaign folks here as well.
Yes.
Shout out. And talk to us a little bit about what that was like out there campaigning and how you were able to actually change who was voting out there.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting, I think all of us, it's not like I'm this unabashed, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed optimist saying the world is going to be better always, all the time. I think that it's this measured optimism that truly sizes up the opposition, sizes up the magnitude of the forces against us, and say, you know what, we're going to be really shrewd about how we're going to pursue change. And so when I started my race, I was not naive about how the local Democratic establishment operated. I was not naive. They all said, oh, join your local Democratic club. Do that. And they said in New York City, which is a Tammany Hall style Democratic establishment. That's their polite way of saying go away. Join your local Democratic club. You know, and that doesn't mean that it's like that in all parts of the country, but certainly where I was, that's what it meant. And, you know, in our race, the incumbent was also the chairman of the local Democratic Party. So he was in charge of his he was literally in charge of his own impartial endorsement by the party. And so for me, actually, my race started off very optimistic, but also very cynical in that people said, oh, operate within the structures of the Democratic Party. And I said, nah, I'm good. And so, because I knew that political machines operate to reinforce the power of those who have always historically had it. And that is why in a district that is 70% people of color, 50% immigrant, overwhelmingly working class, we had never had a member of Congress that was a person of color that did not come from a dynastic political machine. And those forces, economic inequality knows no party, injustice knows no party, justice knows no party. It is a force unto itself. And so what I decided to do was to say, I am going to run as a Democrat for several reasons in the state of New York. But I also knew that if I was going to run first and foremost in the pursuit of justice, I had to stitch together a broad-based coalition of activists and the people who are actually in the streets fighting for change. And so my first endorsements were not from local Democratic clubs. My first endorsements were from Black Lives Matter of Greater New York. They were for Muslims for Progress of New York City. They were from folks like Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress. And what I knew going in was what I wasn't going to compromise. I was not going to compromise on the fact that I was not going to take any lobbyist money. I was not going to compromise on my platform of single-payer healthcare, tuition-free college, decarcerating our society, and ending the school-to-prison pipeline. I knew that those were not going to be my compromises. So I think but despite recognizing the overwhelming forces that would lead or would encourage me to not win, I also knew that as long as I felt in my heart that what I was fighting was right and the right thing to do, it was my duty to do it. And so I was not overwhelmingly attached to the outcome of winning or losing, but I was very, very intimately attached to the struggle for economic and racial justice.
I want to also give people a bit of a peek inside the campaign. I got to spend some time with you today and at some of the talks that you were doing. And you know, I remember just yesterday we had planned this for a while, but found out that you were coming in like last night instead of coming in this morning.
Called an audible.
Yeah, and I asked someone from the team, like, hey, are y'all like flying in? And she's like, nah, we driving, right? Like, and like very late at night, and so y'all rolled in a minivan. Two of the staff that are with you, one your cousin, has a kid with them, probably in here somewhere, right?
There
right?
she is.
Yeah, and this, I think a lot of people maybe see you on TV a lot and like all these different interviews and think you're flying, like, I don't know if they think you're flying first class, but I was thinking about how judicious you've been, your campaign has been with the funds that have been coming in as well. Talk about what that means to you, and like in general, just what is the ethos of your campaign? If you had to like really boil it down and say like what y'all are about, like what would you say that is?
Oh yeah, we are 100% guided by the fight for liberation of working class Americans. And this is about social, economic, and racial justice for working class and poor and middle class Americans in the United States of America. That is what drives us. That is why I don't accept a dime of corporate lobbyist money. That is why I do not accept this false premise that you have to choose between race and class, because that is a deliberate attempt to divide us. It's a deliberate attempt to divide us. And it's not glamorous, which is the weird thing that I always try to convey, and I try to convey that on social media a lot as well. You know, if anyone follows me on Instagram, I have these Instagram stories where I'm a hot mess, like I'm sweaty and I don't have makeup on, and I think that's really important to convey, because, you know, whenever you have one of these interviews with CNN or any one of these large, media corporations, this is what they do. They send a black car to your house. They don't let you take public transit or anything because they cannot risk you being late. So they send a car to your house, and all you need to do is get dressed. You don't need to do anything else. You just shower and get in the clothes you're going to be in. You get in that car. That car takes you to whatever their central place is, whether it's 59th Street or 30 Rock or whatever it is. And you go in, and these people, they curl your hair if you have long hair or whatever. They do your hair, they do your makeup, they do all of these things. And then, bam, you're on cable news. But what they don't see and what doesn't get conveyed is the fact that the rest of that day, you're out just hoofing it. And what's really important to me is I started this campaign working in a restaurant. I know what $27 means. I know. And one of the first recurring contributions that we ever got to this campaign was a $1 a month monthly recurring donation from a dishwasher in New Jersey. For me, when someone trusts you with their hope, with their dreams, and with their resources, it doesn't matter how much it is, that to me is an immense responsibility. And it's one that I feel an immense pressure to steward and to at least try my best to live up to each and every day.
I've got just one more question for you, and then we're going to take it to you all in the audience. I do ask, stay where you are. We'll get you. So just, be where you are, and if you have questions, start to think about it. No? Mark says no? You going to do the standing mic? Mark says no, we're going to do the standing mic. Whatever Mark says is what we do. So that's it. But yeah, we'll be right there. So my question for you is, a lot of people, I've seen today, a lot of people talk about how much of an inspiration you are to them. Can you talk about the kind of people that you're seeing out there on the road that inspire you?
Oh, yeah. I think it sounds really cheesy, but what I often say is that inspiration is one of the few renewable resources that we have. And so the people that sometimes say that they're inspired by me are the same ones that I feel inspired by. I am inspired by all of the working mothers and parents out there that are just making it work despite almost everything being stacked up against them. I am amazed and inspired by people making an hourly wage that are able to provide for full and entire families and raise their kids right with good values. I am inspired by the teachers who are able to fulfill the social and spiritual and emotional and intellectual needs of their students. Sometimes I see all of the forces. When we are divesting our economic systems, when we're rather divesting from our safety net, divesting from our education and healthcare, and to see people somehow make it work anyway is really inspiring to me. And the fact that it really is a movement, it's kind of tailing on the question that I had just answered in the most recent answer. There's a crazy story about this dress, and I haven't told too many people. Earlier this week, I was actually having breakfast with Rashida Tlaib, who is here, the candidate from Michigan. She came into New York, and we were sharing breakfast in my district in Jackson Heights in Queens. And it's, like I said, it's not glamorous. It's been really crazy. I have not done my laundry in forever. everything is really smelly, and it's got holes in it and stains and like everything. And so anyways, I'm sitting there, and it's one of those days where I have like no makeup on and like my hair is all frizzy, but I'm having breakfast. No, I have no business looking like I do in public, but I do, having breakfast with Rashida. And so I'm there, and it wasn't planned, it wasn't announced anywhere that I was having breakfast with her. I just said, hey, we're gonna go to this place to have breakfast. So we're having breakfast in this place in Jackson Heights, and this woman taps me on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's this woman named Christina. And Christina is a mom in the district, and she had knocked on a bunch of doors for us, and she had actually tried to run for city council the year before, but the political machine and the Democratic machine bumped her off the ballot, which is something you can do in the state of New York. And so she turned to me, and I said, oh, hey, Christina, how are you? She said, I'm good. She said, you know, it's the craziest thing that you're here, because I know that you thrift shop for your clothes. I kind of write about this sometimes. And she goes, I go thrift shopping for my clothes too. And she said, I was just at the thrift store, and I got this dress that was too small for me. And I was talking to my neighbor, and she said, you know who would fit in that dress? Alexandria might fit in that dress. And we had no intention of seeing each other. And I bump into her, and she goes, here it is. And she pulls out this grocery bag from this tote bag that she had. And she had this dress in her bag about 3 days ago. And yeah, I mean, and Rashida's sitting there watching this whole exchange, and she's like, isn't that amazing? And that's really what it takes. Like, that is what mass movements provide. I felt this way when I was at Standing Rock. I felt this way, in my organizing with BLM. It really is like magic. When everyone decides to participate, it really is almost like every need you have becomes fulfilled and provided for. Because what you think you have to give is too little or too silly. Could you imagine picking, seeing a dress in the thrift shop and it's like not your size, and you're like, you know who this would fit? My Congresswoman. And then you get it, and then you give it to her, and then she's like, I'll wear that. But that is really the power of mass movements. It's the belief that no gesture is too small or too insignificant. And lo and behold, I went home and I zipped this thing up, and it fits me to a T. It really is like this kind of Cinderella slipper type of thing. And that's really the gasoline that all of this stuff really runs on. It is mass movements. We can never afford to think that the only organizing worth pursuing is electoral only. We can only think of electoral politics as a toolbox in the pursuit of a larger social mission. And your electoral organizing should be a part of what you do, like hygiene, like flossing once a day. But it should be, after you floss, you also take a shower. You also sleep enough at night. You also brush your hair. We have to engage in the basic civic organizing, which, by the way, is why it's so important that we fight for a living wage, and it's also why it's so important that we fight for criminal justice reform, because when people, that is honestly one of the worst consequences of the growing gap between the rich and the poor getting poorer, is that when you have to work 160, 40, when you have to work more than 40 hours a week just to make ends meet, then what it does is that it diminishes the time that you have to organize with your union, to organize with your religious faith, to organize with your civic association. All of these forms of organizing are tenets of a healthy democracy. And the less we pay and the more we shortchange our workers, then the less they have to organize. And so we have to understand that growing income inequality is a democracy problem. And, and that these have consequences that ripple far beyond just the profound injustice of struggling to make ends meet.
As we invite folks to come up to the mic here, I want to say, the original question there was who inspires you. The correct.
Oh, sorry. No. Everyday people.
No, the correct answer was you, Raul. You inspire me. But that's fine. So, all right, we're ready. And I do ask that any questions that you ask, you keep them relatively brief, and it would be great if there was a question mark at the end of it at some point. It'd be terrific. So let's go for it. How you doing?
Hi, thank you for leading by example. After seeing this film, I thought it was incredibly moving. I think it's important that people see this film. And I'm hoping that there's some way you can encourage either the filmmaker or whoever you know to somehow make this free and public and available perhaps online. It's hard enough to get people to vote today, but to see this, I think, would make a big difference. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think you will. I think you would be open to that.
It'd probably be on Netflix at some point. If someone has a password they'd like to share, now would be a good time. Please step up.
Just want to give a quick shout out to the Howard Thurman Center and also DSA.
Yes.
How will you engage with your colleagues who don't think the movement for social democracy can speak to folks, for example, in the Midwest?
Well, I think, first of all, like what was so wonderfully illustrated in this film is that the American electorate is far left of where Congress is right now. And so I think that maintaining the confidence that these beliefs are not the radical socialist tyranny or whatever that everyone is trying to make it out to be, but in fact that it is exactly what American people are asking for. 70% of Americans now believe in Medicare for all, including 52% of Republican voters. I mean, come on. So really, I think honestly, it's not about me convincing them. It's about people calling their elected officials and say, do the job that I sent you there for. And because I'm not going to convince someone from Iowa of nothing. I will always be that girl from the Bronx to them. But the majority of voters believe in this, and the more we start engaging constituents with their elected officials, the more we can impact that change. I mean, that is exactly how we got to over 100 co-sponsors on HR 676 Medicare for All to begin with. It was from constituents, pressuring and organizing constituents in contacting their member of Congress.
Thank you for coming to Brookline. I have a short question. If in a few months from now the Supreme Court looks like I'm pretty scared it's going to, a court that would overturn Roe and make the president above the rule of law, what is to be done?
I think that we take back the House, we take back the Senate, we take back the presidency, and we pack the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Next. No, thank you. It's an important question.
Thank you for coming. Your poise and optimism are exactly what we need right now. So my question is, how do you galvanize young voters who have put you where you are right now?
Well, so, and that is important to talk about and discuss. We won our primary by expanding the electorate 68% over the last off-year midterm primary election. And that expansion, immediately after my win, all of these folks that were paying absolutely zero attention to our race before June 26th suddenly had all of the answers within 6 hours. And they all knew that they looked at, and essentially this is what happened. And this is like kind of largely this liberal, whatever, but but they looked at my last name, they looked at the census of my district, and they said, she won because she's Latina. And that was, you name it. Some of the most respected people in political analysis came to that conclusion. But when you actually saw the results, first of all, we won across demographics, thank you very much. We won white voters, we won Latino voters, we won voters of all races, creeds, and incomes. We even won Trump voters, believe it or not. We even won those. What took us over the edge, though, and turned it into a blowout was young voters. It was young people who organized. It was young people who really kind of turned out the vote. And in fact, it was bottom-up organizing in terms of age as well, because a lot of people were coming to me and say, hey, I voted for you because my nephew sent me a text message. I voted for you because my grandson gave me a call. This one woman said, my son has never called me more often than the week before your election. So we're putting families together, folks. But in terms of maintaining a young electorate engaged, I think it's by not backing down from what is being called radicalism. We cannot back down from our values. I will not back down from saying that an agency that has systematically and repeatedly committed human rights violations cannot be reformed. It must be abolished. I will not back down from saying those things. So I think with that, and then also working with movements to refine and further clarify in a lot of different policy points is how we really maintain younger voters engaged. And by the way, also, I don't understand why people think this puzzle of youth turnout is so puzzling when we have the oldest Congress in American history at the present moment. And it's not an ageist thing, but it's to say that it's very hard to turn out when you don't see yourself reflected in your government at all. At all. It's not an average thing. You know, I believe that we should have all generations represented in Congress. But when we only have one generation represented in Congress, it's no surprise that it's very hard to get young people to turn out. And when you have younger candidates, young people tend to turn out for those candidates because they see themselves in their governments. Same thing for any sector or any type or any identity of a candidate, to see a working class candidate run, to see a candidate of color, to see a woman, to see a queer or trans candidate run, it really inspires turnout because it makes you believe that you can do it too. And the idea that we're supposed to somehow rally all people and all creeds behind the dudes that literally look like they founded this country is not going to work. We need to have a diversity in our governance in order to inspire the entire electorate to turn out.
Thank you.
No offense. I'm really not trying to be ageist, but it's like, we have no 20-year-olds in Congress, really? And come on.
Yeah. I mean, I want to add too that people like you and Ayanna Pressley, and I see Liz Miranda, who just won her state rep race, and others, like people seeing that candidates that look like them can win, that do win, actually matters too. Yeah.
Buenas noches. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Monica, and I'm a field organizer in the city of Boston. You spoke briefly about this in the last question, but you were able to engage voters that had never been engaged before. And one of the struggles that I have in an urban area and communities of color is meeting people where they are and engaging them where they are outside of the traditional field structure. And I wanted to hear a little bit about how you sat down with your people and sort of determined how you were going to approach people.
This is a really excellent question because right now the strategies and tools that are commonly accepted in electoral politics are not designed for inner city environments. They're not. So you're working against the grain with the tools that you are given to organize communities that have historically not turned out to vote. And so the question isn't, how do I jam these communities to fit the pre-established tools and methods? And you have to flip it and say, how do I change my methods to accommodate the community? Right now, for example, one of the big things that we had in our campaign was when I first started knocking on doors over a year ago, which, by the way, we were knocking on doors for well over a year ahead of our primary win. You know, if you want to run as a grassroots candidate, you need to start November 7th of 2018 for the 2020 elections. And I'm just keeping that very real. It doesn't mean they have to knock on your first door, but you need to start trying, thinking, mulling it over, because grassroots candidates and grassroots campaigns, you know, all of that money is a replacement for work. All of that money that you flood in there is just a replacement for time and effort. And so what we did was that we put in the time and we put in the effort because we knew that it was going to be really hard to get the money. And so what I learned knocking on doors a year and a half ago was that I was really getting to know what it meant to run in a community like mine, a community that is 50% immigrant. And for example, I was knocking on doors and nobody was answering. Nobody would answer doors in Corona, doors in Jackson Heights. I would talk to women and families through closed doors and have conversations because they were so scared. They thought that we were ICE. They thought that we were financial, bill collectors. And in urban environments, people think that you will go to jail, that you will be incarcerated if you owe money to somebody. And there was so much fear in these communities that there was no way that you were going to get these doors to open. But the only organizing tools that are given to you by the party require you to go to a person's residence. In order to identify a party, in order to identify a voter, you have to do something known as walk a turf, which means that they only give you addresses. And so you have to go to that address, you have to knock on the door, someone has to open it, you have to say, hey, are you Mrs. So-and-so, or is Mrs. So-and-so home? And the person says, yes, and you have to identify them by their place of residence. But when people don't want to open the door, how can you identify a voter? So we said, to hell with it. And what we did was that we pulled the voter file and we built a tool of our own. And we built a tool that allowed us, we literally, the technologists on our campaign literally designed an app that would allow you to reverse look up a voter so that you can go to a safe space in the community. You can approach someone in the grocery store, you can approach someone on the subway, you can approach someone at a public community meeting and talk to them about the campaign. And then once they were on board, you say, hey, we're just counting votes, what's your name? And look it up that way. No other place or campaign in America had done that up to this point. Not a single one. This is 2018. And so what we need to do is, I think, adapt some of our methods, adapt some of our rules in order to serve the outcome. And when it comes to inner city urban communities, a lot of it has to do with safety. A lot of it has to do with connecting in public and safe spaces and then getting that buy-in from people, because there is so much danger for those communities in the world that we live in, that the primary motive is to make them feel safe, and then also to actually fight for something radical enough that will help them. Because those are the folks that are always first on the chopping block. It's always the undocumented, it's always people in the LGBT community, it's always the poor, it's always working class people. And then once you erode their rights, it becomes super easy to snatch away the life of the middle class. And so when you are able to build those reservoirs of safety, what you're really also doing is reinforcing the basic tenets that allow middle class life to be possible.
Thank you.
Just keep it on the time. We have time for one more question. We'll see what happens. If it's a short one, we might be able to get one more in.
Okay, I'll keep it short.
So I want to say thank you so much for being here. My name's Noah. I'm a volunteer with Justice Democrats. I want to give them a big shout out.
Woo!
So a question I had for you was a big issue that was discussed in this film was trade deals and the devastating impacts that NAFTA and TPP have had for unions and working people across the country. I think that's a big reason Donald Trump won. And I just was curious, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention in your race, but if you could just discuss your opinion on NAFTA and TPP and what you would do on those issues.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. So when it comes to trade, there has been so much resentment generated on trade in general, and particularly against NAFTA, and I think rightfully against the TPP and NAFTA. But it's not because I think trade in and of itself is bad. You know, trade generally tends to generate benefits, gains from trade. But the problem is that the gains from that trade always go to the tiny sliver of corporations and the 1%. So although trade in and of itself is not a wealth transfer, it ends up in practice acting like a wealth transfer from working people in the world to essentially the richest and most wealthy corporations. And so when it comes to trade and when it comes to how we approach trade, we need to transition. When we have trade and some of these jobs get outsourced, we need to see that as an opportunity to refocus workforces into innovating for next generation industries, which is why one of the big proposals that we're currently working on is a 21st century Green New Deal. Because we cannot afford to continue operating on fossil fuels, not for our kids, not for our grandkids, not for our future, not for our lifetime. But what we need to do is subsidize, and not just subsidize, but allow public college and trade school to be free to all so that those workers can help us transition to the 100% renewable and sustainable energy that we so desperately needed yesterday.
Thank you.
Let's get one more question in here. There you go. Thank you.
So Sean very graciously let me ask the final question, so I'm merging them into two. So my name is Lina Cañón, and I hear a lot from you and from this movie about solidarity and that being like the driving factor. So my question is, what would you say to somebody who's wanting to run for office in a city like Boston or districts like Boston, where not only all of the people that you've talked about exist, but also like the really big inequality and wealth gap exists, where selling this concept of solidarity makes people really uncomfortable because they have to face their own privilege and their own wealth. And then at the end, if I can add Sean's, about President Obama and his endorsement to you, and how you feel about that coming
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Amazing. Thank you very much. I think when it comes to solidarity, it is, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's a little bit mixed. I feel like sometimes I'm not the best expert on this issue, because when you are born in an area where you lack privilege, I was born in the Bronx. My mom scrubbed toilets. I scrubbed toilets with her so that I could and my family could afford to live in a zip code that just gave the same public education as any other kid would get. When I, growing up, experiencing racism, experiencing all of these things, it became, for me, acknowledging where I had privilege. I have privilege as, for example, I commonly cite, I'm a cisgender heterosexual woman. So having experienced the oppression, economic, social, etc., that I had growing up, it was really easy for me to just transfer that and say, oh, what would I have really loved people to be like when I grew up? I can say, hey, this is the privilege that I have, and when I'm in spaces where no queer people are around, I can be the hard ass that is like, no, you're not going to be bigoted in front of me, and that it's not socially acceptable to act that way. Or in places where if I pass, You know, for example, if people think that I mean, before I ran, when people didn't know my story or my background, when they could exude or perpetuate classism, for example, or elitism, to be that check, it's really important. But I think first and foremost, it is the acknowledgement that our destinies are tied. We don't get to leave anyone behind and still have a fair democracy. We don't. And the notion that you can come to a compromise by somehow throwing the undocumented under the bus, somehow throwing, you know, trans people under the bus, it is not how, it still perpetuates the basic fissures that allow what we saw develop. You know, when you allow any group of people to live in the shadows, those are the group of people that will be targeted and marginalized in the ascent of fascism, for example. What was the first thing that Trump said? He targeted Mexicans. And the reason he did that is because undocumented people are some of the most vulnerable in society. And that was the first one that he could get away with in saying, oh yeah, but like some of them are, right? Like there'll always be those equivocators. And so to really be that hard check is important. When it comes to the president's endorsement, I'm happy to receive it today, because I think that I operate, first of all, I think it's a great honor to receive it, because I think that first of all, I operate from the position as an organizer. And it's really easy to, you know, have your activist hat on all the time and always say you're either with us or you're against us. But the reason I'm honored to have this endorsement is because 2 weeks ago he came out in favor of Medicare for all. And what I think that I don't know, maybe he is, maybe he's not, but I think that endorsement it shows, you know, we may not agree on every single issue. I may not agree with every single thing that he's done, but I think the acknowledgement that this movement is legitimate and that it is part of the party and that it is part of our future is a positive step for the future of this country. So I don't believe personally in burned bridges. And sometimes that makes a lot of people really mad, you know? People are like, you know, like they did this one time. And it's like, listen, right now, I'm sorry. I hate to be one of these like Debbie Downers, but November, future of our democracy is at stake. Like it just is. Like it just is. And I am proud to be a member of DSA because I believe that it is one of the most innovative organizing groups in the country. All right, like that doesn't, okay, like does that mean that I should, you know, burn down every non-DSA Democratic candidate running this year? No, I don't, because I believe that what I am a part of is a generational struggle. And I went to DC for one day, and I met with a lot of people and I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But I did meet with one member of Congress, and I won't say his name, her name, whoever. I'm already getting myself in trouble. I won't say their name, but what they told me was, it was almost like a secret. And they said, you know, no one else can come in favor of your position, come out in favor of some of these positions that you've held, but that's because you're young, and by the time that you're our age, we all know that your position will be the morally right one in the end. So they know. They know. And of course, there's complications and all of those things, but anytime that I can get someone to co-sign on the movement, welcome. That's just how I feel. Just welcome. Come on in.
Oh, wow.
It's all for you.
Thank you for that. And that there are folks that come in here and clean up after we're done. So if you can help them out by bringing whatever you brought in here back out to the trash, that'd be terrific too.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And I just want to close out by saying thank you for spending your day with us here in Boston and Brookline. And we wish you well. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, everyone, so much for coming.